දැන් මම කොහොමද යන්න ඕනේ මෙහෙමද? ඔව්. මෙහෙම?
කොහොම හැරිලා. හැරිලා යන්න.
ඔව්.
ගිහලා හැමදේම
ඔයා මගේ
මට පිටු පාන්න එපා.
ඔව්.
ප්‍රශ්න කරනකොට මෙහෙම ප්‍රශ්න කරන්න.
ඔයා මේ පැත්තේ ඉන්නේ.
ඈ?
ඔයා මේ පැත්තේ ඉන්නේ. නෑ මේ පැත්තේ.
ඔව් ඔව්. නෑ මෙහෙම ඇරලා මෙහෙම මයික් එක තියන්න. කොහොම හරි ඔයා මට පිටු පාන්න එපා. ඉතින් දෙපැත්තෙන් එක පැත්තකට හැරෙන්න.
මෙහෙම පටන් ගන්න ඈ. ගමුද රියසල් එකක්? රියසල් එකක් ගමුද? රියසල් එකක් ගමුද? නිකන්.
අර අපු ඩේවිඩ් ගන්න ගන්න.
මම ගොඩාවක් නිකන්ද? නිකන් බැනුම් අහන්න වෙයි දැන්. ශ්‍රී ලංකා විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් දෙපාර්තමේන්තුව පවත්වන ජාතික
හරිද රෙදි දානවා වගේ. එක සැරේ දෙමු.
හා.
ඊළඟට අරස්තු
මෙතන මෙයාව ලෑස්ති
අන්න
කරගෙන
ඒක කෙටියෙන් කියන්නේ එතකොට හරියද? මොකද්ද සිද්ධ වෙන්නේ කියලා කෙටියෙන් කියන්නේ.
අර ඒ චුට්ට පොඩ්ඩක් මෙතන.
ඈ?
නෑ අර චුට්ට මෙතෙන්ට එන්න කතා කරා. ඔහොම ඉන්න.
මේ වතුර බෝතල එක අයින් කරන්න. ඔයා කතා කරගෙන යන කතා කරන අතර මේ කතා කරන අතරදී මම මේ පැත්තට හරවනවා ඒක ඔයාලට ප්‍රශ්නයක් නැහැ නේද?
කරගෙන යන්න.
දුවන්න එපා. මාවත් බලාගෙන යන්න. ඔයා හැරෙනකොට අනිවාර්යයෙන් මම ඔයාගේ ළඟ මේක තියෙනවා.
හා.
හරිද කියන්නේ?
ශ්‍රී ලංකා විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් දෙපාර්තමේන්තුව මගින් පවත්වනු ලබන 2015 ජාතික විශ්‍රාමික දින සමුළුව මේ වන විට ශ්‍රී ලංකා පදනම් ආයතනයේදී පැවැත්වෙනවා. ඔබට මේ පිටුපසින් දිස්වන්නේ ශ්‍රී ලංකා විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් දෙපාර්තමේන්තුව සමග අත්වැල් බැඳගෙන ඉන්න පෞද්ගලික ආයතනවල වෙළඳ කුටි. ඔවුන් අද ශ්‍රී ලංකා විශ්‍රාම දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවත් සමග අත්වැල් බැඳගෙන කටයුතු කරනවා. අපි දැන් සම්බන්ධ වෙමු ශ්‍රී ලංකා විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවේ අනුග්‍රහයෙන් තමන්ගේ දිවිය ශක්තිමත් කරගන්න විශ්‍රාමිකයන් සමග. තමන්ගේ දිරියෙන් ජීවිතේ ජය ගන්න තවත් විශ්‍රාමිකයෙක් අපිත් එක්ක එකතු වෙලා ඉන්නවා. මොකද හිතන්නේ අද දවස ගැන?
බොහොම සතුටුයි. බොහොම සතුටුයි. මම ණයක් අරගෙන සුවන් රැකියාව දිනු කරගෙන මේ ඒ වැඩ කරගෙන ඉන්නවා. මහත්යාගේ විශ්‍රාම පඩියෙන් මම ණයක් ගත්තා මේ සුවන් රැකියාව දිනු කරගෙන වැඩ කරගෙන වැඩ කරන්න තිනක දාගෙන මට ඒක හරි සතුටක්. මහත්යා නැතිලා මට ගොඩක් ලොකු හයියක්.
බොහොම ස්තුතියි ඔබතුමියට. ඉතින් මෙවැනි වූ විශ්‍රාමිකයන් උදෙසා ශ්‍රී ලංකා විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් දෙපාර්තමේන්තුව අති මෙහෙයක් ඔවුන් වෙනුවෙන් කරනවා. මේ අවස්ථාවේදී මම කැමැති සම්බන්ධ කරගන්න පෑන් ඒෂියා බැංකුවේ වින්ද්‍ය සවිරාව. වින්ද්‍ය අපිට කියන්න මේ වගේ විශ්‍රාමිකයන් උදෙසා ඔබගේ ආයතනයෙන් මොන වගේ දෙයක්ද සිද්ධ කරන්නේ?
ඇත්ත වශයෙන්ම කියනවා නම් මේ ණය ලබා දෙන්නේ විශ්‍රාමිකයන්ට ඔවුන්ට කිසිදු ඇපයක් රහිතවයි. දැනට මූලිකවම ගැටලුව තිබ්බ ශ්‍රී ලංකාව තුළ විශ්‍රාමිකයන්ට ණයක් ලබා දීමේදී ඇප ලබා ගැනීම සහ ඔවුන්ට ලබා ගැනීමේ තිබී අපහසුතාවය. ඒ තුළ ලබා ගැනීමට අපහසුතාවය. අපි එය ඉවතලා ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ ප්‍රථම වතාවට තමයි මේ සම්මාන කියන ණය යෝජනා ක්‍රමය හඳුන්වා දෙන්නේ. ඒ තුළ අපි බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්නේ විශ්‍රාමිකයා ණයකරුවෙක් කිරීම පමණක් නොවේ, ණයකරුවෙක් ඔහු ණය ලබා ගැනීම පමණක් නොවේ. ඒ තුළ මෙවන් ඔවුන්ගේ ස්වයං ව්‍යාපාර තුළින් ඔවුන් විශ්‍රාම වැටුපෙන් අඩුවන ඔවුන්ගේ වාරිකයට වඩා වැඩි ප්‍රමාණයක් ඔවුන්ට උපයා ගැනීමට හැකියාව උපද්දවීම තමයි මූලිකවම අපගේ අරමුණ වෙන්නේ. මේ තුල ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ විශ්‍රාමිකයන් 33000කට අධික ප්‍රමාණයක් මේ වසර දෙකමාර තුල පෑන් ඒෂියා බැංකුව මගින් රුපියල් බිලියන 15.5කට අධික ණය ප්‍රමාණයක් දීලා තිනවා. එයින් 75%කට අධික ප්‍රමාණයක් ඔවුන් ස්වයං රැකියා සඳහා ආයෝජනය කොට වර්තමානයේ තුල විශ්‍රාමිකයා සාමාන්‍යයෙන් ඔවුන් ලැබූ විශ්‍රාම වැටුපට වඩා දෙගුණ තෙගුණ ප්‍රමාණයක් උපයා ගැනීමට හැකියාව ලැබිලා තියෙනවා. මම හිතනවා ඒ තුල අපි බැංකුවක් විදියට ආදර්ශයක් වුණා සියලුම බැංකු වලට මෙවන් කටයුතු කිරීම සඳහා මූලික ආරම්භය ලබා දීම තුළ උන්ට ආදර්ශයක් වුණා. ඒ තුළ බොහෝ බැංකු අද විට ඔවුන් වෙනුවෙන් විවිධ ණය යෝජනා ක්‍රමයන් සහ විවිධ වරප්‍රසාදන ක්‍රියාත්මක කරනවා.
ස්තුතියි වින්ද්‍යාවිත් එක්ක එකතු වුණාට. මම හිතන්නේ ශ්‍රී ලංකා විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවත් එක්ක ආයතන බොහොම ප්‍රමාණයක් එකතු වෙලා ඉන්නවා, අත්වැල් බැඳගෙන ඉන්නවා. අපේ විශ්‍රාමිකයන් උදෙසා ඔවුන්ගේ සුබසිද්ධිය උදෙසා ඔවුන් සියලුම හැම වෙලාවෙම වගේ කටයුතු කරනවා. අපි මේ දැන් ඉන්නේ මරීනා වෙළඳ කුටිය අසල. අපි චුට්ටක් මරීනා වෙළඳ කුටියේ ඉන්න ඒ නිලධාරි මහතුරුන් එක්ක කතා කරමු. මොකද හිතන්නේ විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවත් එක්ක එකට කටයුතු කරන්න අවස්ථාව ලැබුණ එක ගැන?
ඇත්තට මේක ලොකු අවස්ථාවක්. මොකද රටට වැඩදායී පුද්ගලයන් විදියට වැඩ කරලා රටට යමක් කරපු සේවය කරපු කට්ටියක් දැන් එයාලා විශ්‍රාම සුභයෙන් ගත කරද්දී අපිට එයාට සම්බන්ධ වෙන්න ලැබිච්ච එක ලොකු ගෞරවයක් හැටියට මම හිතනවා.
ඔව්, විශ්‍රාමිකයන් වෙනුවෙන් ඔබේ ආයතනයෙන් මම හිතන්නේ මරීනා ආයතනයෙන් මොකද්ද කරන්නේ ඔබේ ආයතනයෙන් ඕන් වෙනුවෙන්?
අත්‍තරම කියනවා නම් මරීනා ආයතනය විසින් මරීනා කියන සන්නම් නාමයේ පැත්තකින් කියලා රටේ වැඩදායී පුද්ගලයන්ට සේවයක් කරපු අයට අපි සේවයක් කරන්න තමයි බැඳිලා ඉන්නේ. ඒකට අපි දැනට අපේ වෙනම වෙළඳ කුටියක් විශ්‍රාම දෙපාර්තමේන්තුව අපි විවෘත කරලා තියෙනවා. ඒකේ ලංකාවේ කිසිම තැනක දෙන්නේ නැති වට්ටමක් අපි ලබා දෙනවා. 120ක වට්ටමක් අපි ඒක විශේෂයෙන්ම විශ්‍රාමිකයන් සඳහාම පමණක් දැනට අපි විවෘත කරලා තියෙනවා එතන. ඒක නිසා අපි බලන්නේ හැමතිස්සෙම විශ්‍රාම ගියත් එයාට අපෙන් යමක් දෙන්න. මොකද එයාලා රටට වැඩදායී දෙයක් කරපු නිසා.
බොහොම ස්තුතියි අපිත් එක්ක එකතු වුණාට. ඉතින් මෙවන් වූ විශාල මෙහෙවරක් කරන පෞද්ගලික ආයතන රසක් මම කිව්වා අද මෙතනට ඇවිල්ලා ඉන්නවා අපිත් එක්ක අත්වැල් බැඳගන්න. මේ දිස්වන්නේ ඔවුන්ගේ වෙළඳ කුටි.
මදාම කතන්දර කියන්නම්.
එටිසලා එතරට ළඟින් නිසා කතරක දුරත් හිතකට ළඟයි.
ඔයා රටකේ දවසින්දලා පුතා නිතරම ඔයා වහනවා. දවස් දෙකකට සැරයක්වත් කෝල් එකක් දීලා පුතාට කතන්දරයක් කියන්න.
දැන් එටිසලාට එතරට ළඟින් පැකේජෙන් එක්සත් අරාබිය සිට ශ්‍රී ලංකාවට කතා කරන්න එක්සත් අරාබි සිම්පතකටත් වඩා අඩුම ඇමතුම් ගාස්තුව.
දැන් මං ඔයාලට හැමදාම කතන්දර කියන්නම්.
එටිසලා එතරට ළඟින් නිසා කතරක දුරත් හිතකට ළඟයි.
ඔයා රටකේ දවසින්දලා පුතා නිතරම ඔයා වහනවා. දවස් දෙකකට සැරයක්වත් කෝල් එකක් දීලා පුතාට කතන්දරයක් කියන්න.
දැන් එටිසලාට එතරට ළඟින් පැකේජ්
කියලා දෙන්න හදන්නේ ලේබල් ගහපු නොගහපු අපි නොදන්න පොල් තෙල් හදන ස්වාභාවික විදිය ගැන. ගහෙන් නෙලාගත්ත ස්වාභාවික කොප්පරා මෙව්ව කරලා
ඒ පුස් නේද?
ස්වාභාවික පුස්.
මීයොත් කාලානේ.
ඒ ස්වාභාවිකයිනේ. ඊට පස්සේ දුම් මෙව්ව කරලා
දුම් මෙව්ව කරාම ඉතින් ස්වාභාවික ගුණත් මෙව්ව වෙනවා.
ස්වභාවිකයි කියන හැමදේම පිරිසිදු නෑ. මම නම් ගන්නේ අපි දන්න පොල් තෙල්. ශරීරයට අහිතකර ටොක්සින් නැති එකම පිරිසිදු පොල් තෙල් මරීනා.
මන් දැන් කියලා දෙන්න හදන්නේ ලේබල් ගහපු නොගහ
ශ්‍රී ලංකා විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවත් සමග අත්වැල් බැඳගෙන ඉන්න පෞද්ගලික ආයතන රසක් තියෙනවා කියලා මම ඔබට කලිනුත් කිව්වා. දැන් මාත් එක්ක එකතු වෙලා ඉන්නවා NSB බැංකුවේ කාර්ය මණ්ඩලයේ
එක්සත් අරාබිය සිට ශ්‍රී ලංකාවට කතා කරන්න එක්සත්
ලංකා විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවත් එක්ක එකතු වෙලා ඔබ එකට කටයුතු කරනවා. මොකද හිතෙන්නේ මොනවාද ඔබෙන් කෙරෙන්නේ විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවේ විශ්‍රාමිකයන් උදෙසා ඔබේ ආයතනයෙන් වෙන සේවය කුමක්ද?
ඔව් ඇත්තටම රටේ සංවර්ධනයට දායක වුණ විශ්‍රාමිකයෝ කියන්නේ අපේ රටේ විශාල කාලයක් සංවර්ධනයට දායක වුණ පුජ්‍යලයෝ. ඒගොල්ලෝ වෙනුවෙන් විශේෂ සීනියර් සිටිසන් අපේ ප්‍රොඩක්ට් කීපයක්ම තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවත් එක්ක එකතු වෙලා අපි මේ වෙනකොට වසර ගණනාවක් තිස්සේ අත්වැල් බැඳගෙන මේ අද තියෙන විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් වැඩසටහනත් එක්ක එකතු වෙලා ඉන්නවා. ඒ වගේම අලුතෙන්ම අපි හඳුන්වලා දෙනවා චාරිකා කියලා වැඩසටහන. ඒකේ කරන්නේ ඒක ණය පහසුකමක්. ඉන්දියාව වගේ රටවල් වලට ගිහිල්ලා මුදල එකපාර යොදවන්න බැරි කට්ටියට ඒ වගේ අත්වල බැඳ ගැනීමක් තමයි අපි කරලා තියෙන ජාතික ඉදිරිකරණ බැංකුවේ. ඒ වගේම ජ්‍යෙෂ්ඨ පුරවැසියන් සඳහා විශේෂ ඉතුරු තම්පතු වලට විශේෂ වැඩි පොලි ප්‍රමාණයක් අපි ලබා දීම සිදු කරනවා.
බොහොම ස්තුතියි අපිත් එක්ක එකතු වුණාට. මීළඟට අපි යොමු වෙන්නේ මහජන බැංකුවේ වෙළඳ කුටිය වෙත. අපි කැමති දැනගන්න කොහොමද මහජන බැංකුවෙන් අපේ රටේ රාජ්‍ය සේවයෙන් විශ්‍රාම ගියපු අපේ විශ්‍රාමිකයන්ට මොන වගේ සේවයක්ද මහජන බැංකුවෙන් සිද්ධ වෙන්නේ කියලා. අපි චුට්ටක් කතා කරමු. ශ්‍රී ලංකා විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් දෙපාර්තමේන්තුව කියන්නේ මේ වන විට තාක්ෂණයෙන් ගොඩක් ඉස්සරහට ඇවිල්ලා ඉන්න ආයතනයක්. රාජ්‍ය ආයතනයක් විදිහට. මොකද හිතන්නේ මේ වගේ ආයතනයක් එක්ක එකට කටයුතු කරන්න ලැබීම ගැන ඔබේ ආයතනයේට?
අපි ඇත්තට සතුටු වෙනවා. මොකද අපේ රාජ්‍ය බැංකුව වශයෙන් අපේ එක්ක තමයි ඒගොල්ලෝ ගොඩක් ගනුදෙනු කරන්නේ දැනට. ඒ හින්දා අපේ ගනුදෙනු ගොඩක් පෙන්ෂන් ගන්න ගොඩක් කස්ටමර් අපේ ගාවේ ඉන්නේ. ලංකාවේ බලනකොට වැඩි පිරිසක් ඉන්නේ මහජන බැංකුවත් එක්ක මේ වයින්ට. ඒ අතරේ අපි ඉන්ට්‍රොඩියුස් කරලා තියෙනවා පරිණත කියන ගිණුමක්. ඒක වයස 55ට වැඩි අයට තමයි අපි ඉන්ට්‍රොඩියුස් කරලා තියෙන්නේ. ඒකේ දැන් ලංකාවේ බලනකොට අනිත් බැංකුවට වඩා අපි තමයි වැඩිම පොලිය දෙන ආයතන වශයෙන් ඉන්නේ. ඒ කියන්නේ 5000ට අඩු ශේෂයට 106ක වාර්ෂික පොලියයි 5000ට වැඩි ශේෂයට 107ක පොලියක්කුත් අපි දෙනවා. මේක සාමාන්‍ය ඉතිරි කිරීම ගිණුමකට පරිණත කියන ගිණුමකට බලන් ගියාම අනිත් බැංක්ස් ඔක්කොම ඊට වඩා අඩු ප්‍රමාණයක් තමයි ගෙවන්නේ. ඊට පස්සේ ලෝන්ස් ගැන බැලුවොත් අපි 1 මිලියන් ලෝන් එකක් දෙනවා. රාජ්‍ය හා පළාත් පාලන ආයතනවල සේවය කර විශ්‍රාමිකීය ආයට අපි 1 මිලියන් දක්වා ලෝන් එකක් ලබා දෙනවා 113 පොලි රේට් එකට. ඒකත් වාසියක්. එතකොට ඒ වගේ පහසුකම් තමයි අපි දැනට සපයන්නේ අපේ ආයතන විශ්යෙන්.
බොහොම ස්තුතියි ඔබතුමීට අපිත් එක්ක එකතු වුණාට. විශ්‍රාමිකයන් උදෙසා විශාල කැපකිරීමක් කරන වර්තමාන ශ්‍රී ලංකා විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවේ කාර්ය මණ්ඩලය ගැනත් සඳහන් කළ යුතුයි. සාමාන්‍යයෙන් රාජ්‍ය ආයතනයක් කියද්දී අපිට එහි කාර්යක්ෂමතාවය ගැන සැලකිල්ලක් දක්වන්නට බෑ. විශ්වාසයක් තබන්නට බෑ. නමුත් ලිපිගණු වලින් ගොඩ ගැහුණු ඒ වගේම ෆයිල් කවර වලින් ගොඩ ගැහුණු විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් දෙපාර්තමේන්තුව අද වෙනකොට ඉතාමත්ම දියුණු තත්වයකට පත් වෙලා තාක්ෂණය අතින් දියුණුවට පත් වෙලා තියෙනවා. එවැනි වූ ආයතනයක් සමග කටයුතු කරන සනස සංවර්ධන බැංකුවත් සමග සනස සංවර්ධන බැංකුවේ වෙළඳ කුටියක් මේ වෙන විට මේ පරිශ්‍රය ඉදිකර තිබෙනවා. අපි ඔවුන් සමග කතා කරමු. විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවත් සමග ඔබත් කටයුතු කරනවා. අත්වල බැඳගෙන ඉන්නවා. මොන වගේ සේවයක්ද අපගේ විශ්‍රාමිකයන් වෙනුවෙන් ඔබ ආයතනයෙන් සිද්ධ කරන්නේ?
අපි උපහාර ලෝන් ස්කීම් එක තියෙනවා අපේ. ඒ වගේම ව්‍යවසායිකයන් සඳහා SME ස්පීඩ් ලෝන් එක තියෙනවා. උත්තමාචාර ලෝන් එක තියෙනවා රණවිරුවන් සඳහා.
විශ්‍රාමිකයන් දෙකොල්ලම සඳහා තියෙනවා උත්තමාචාර උපහාර ලෝන් එක තියෙනවා විශේෂයෙන් විශ්‍රාමිකයන් සඳහාම. අප නැතුව අප කිසි අපයක් අවශ්‍ය නැහැ. මේ තමන්ගේ විශ්‍රාම වැටුප සනස බැංකුවට හැරුවම ඒ මාසෙම කිසිම කරදරයක් නැතුව ගන්න පුළුවන් ණය මුදල ගන්න පුළුවන් රස්තියාදුවකින් තොරව.
රස්තියාදුවකින් තොරව ඉස්සර වගේ පරක්කු වෙන්නේ නැතුව අමාරුවකින් තොරව තමන්ගේ විශ්‍රාම වැටුප ගන්න පුළුවන් ක්‍රම අද වෙනකොට ශ්‍රී ලංකා විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවත් එක්ක අත්වැල් බැඳගෙන ඉන්න පෞද්ගලික ආයතනත් සමග එකතු වෙලා මේ විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් දෙපාර්තමේන්තුව ගොඩක් ඉස්සරහට ගිහිලා අපේ විශ්‍රාමිකයන්ට ගොඩක් පහසුකම් සපයලා දීලා තියෙනවා. ඉතින් එහි සම්පූර්ණ ප්‍රශංසාව හිමි විය යුත්තේ විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් දෙපාර්තමේන්තුවේ අධ්‍යක්ෂ ජෙනරාල් සුනිල් හෙට්ටිආරච්චි මැතිතුමා ඇතුළු ඔහුගේ කාර්ය මණ්ඩලයට. ආරාධනා කරනවා අපිත් එක්ක දිගටම රැඳී ඉන්න කියලා.
Having no. So ultimately what happens is what you get becomes on an ongoing basis unaffordable because inflation would have then overtaken your return. And another issue is the way the salaries are structured. Sometimes it's considered as a tax, right? when it is considered as a tax, you don't want to pay it. So the salary is structured in such a way that you get in allowances. Fuel allowance, entertainment allowance, education allowance, home allowance, this allowance. So what happens is the amount on which EPF is paid is very small. So therefore the benefits that you end up getting is also inadequate because of the manipulation in the way salaries are structured. But of course you live for today. First you need to live. Only then you need to live after you retire. So there is a issue there. I mean, so as people who have to survive, they want to get as much as possible in their paycheck. Then the unsustainability of the existing system is the next point that I want to touch upon. Right? And the current retirement range in the public service is 55 years. And we said women live up to 78 and men live up to 72. The pension benefits continue until the demise of the spouse. So based on the female life expectancy of 78, pensions have to be paid for 23 years. More than that, right, on average. From the end of the employment. Some estimates have placed the cost to the state of the pension in the public service to be greater whilst in retirement than during employment. I mean, I think this is a unique situation that the amount that you pay public servants during the time they work is less than the amount that the government has to fork out to pay after they retire. So, some estimates are placed, and in the case of the military, they are pensionable after 20 years. So the entitlement is over a longer period of time. In 2014, the Treasury spent 127 billion. That accounted for 7% of total government expenditure and 1.3% of GDP. He just told me, the Director General just told me that it is going to be 145 billion, 196 billion for 2016, 195 billion for 2016. So you just kind of get a sense of how huge the liability is. So the burden on the Treasury will continue to increase. Due to the age structure transition, the dependency ratio will decline. That is, there will be fewer people working, supporting a person in retirement. So this, Mr. Minister, is going to create what we call an intergenerational conflict. So less people working to support more people in retirement, and less money every year available to the state to pay us pensions because it is unfunded. So, couple of solutions, of course, we need to talk about, but one I think we need to really seriously consider is the retirement age. I think that the retirement age should increase to 60 years in the next 5 years or so, perhaps 1 year at a time. 60, 55 to 60. Now everybody is 60. So perhaps then we should increase it to 65. Because some people can work for longer. So 65 is a year at a time over the next 5 years. In case of the EPF, members are entitled to withdraw their balances when they attain the age of 55. Correct? That's correct. The issue there is, really speaking, even though it is a contribution fund, 90% of the assets are invested in government securities. So for all practical purposes, it is a pay-as-you-go system. So you need to go beyond the itself, or rather what we have been told over the years, and see what the reality of the EPF. As long as contributions keep outpacing withdrawals, the system is solvent. But Mr. Minister, I want to warn you that the recent trend is alarming. In 2013, inflows were 80 billion. Outflows of the EPF was 50 billion and net inflows were 30 billion. Okay? In 2014, inflows increased to 90 billion, outflows increased by a greater amount to 65 billion, resulting in net flows declining to 25 billion. If this trend continues, net flows may turn negative and the fund will have to liquidate holdings to meet outflows. We'll have to liquidate some other assets to meet the outflows because it is narrowing on a sort of a continuing basis. The corollary of this trend is that the margin, the EPF will play a lesser role in funding the fiscal deficit. Either way, the government will have to make that call. It is only sensible to increase the member withdrawal age to perhaps 60 from 55 to increase the accumulation and improve net inflows. And this can be done gradually over the next 5 years or so. But these are only things that I'm throwing up for discussion perhaps later during the day because these are valid points. And the last one is a lack of portability. To be eligible for public service pension, a person has to work for 20 years in the public service. Premature exit or late entry into the service is costly, for there is no accumulation of benefits and or transferability except for the widows and orphans component. That's correct, isn't it? This seriously hampers labour mobility, since the requirement to serve 20 years will not encourage a middle-aged person to enter, nor encourage a younger person to leave the public service. Premature retirement is possible, but the pension benefits only accrue from the retirement age of 60 or 55. Thus, the lack of portability of accrued benefits deprive the beneficiary from further growth of this balance, the latter years being the most bountiful. Right? And just to conclude, that in the case of the EPF, it is one monolithic fund. Thus, it offers no choice of investment style related to a member's risk tolerance and does not permit transferability of the balance to any other approved provident fund. So, what I did, like I said, I wrote it down because I didn't want to miss the points, is to try and explain to you the multifaceted problem that we are facing today. Just to recap, the inefficient labor participation. We talked about the participation of males of 75, females of 35, and if we looked at 20 hours or more a week, it fell to an average of 47. Then we talked about coverage, that so many people are out of the loop and are not eligible for benefits. Then the third point is the unsustainability of the system, both the public sector pension scheme and the provident fund. And the last point I made was the lack of portability, that it disincentivizes people to either leave or join later. So I think I covered some of the salient issues without going into too much technical detail because that is left for the experts in the afternoon. I hope this would be useful in your deliberations today. Thank you very much.
Inefficient labor participation answers.
මන් දැන් කියලා දෙන්න හදන්නේ ලේබල් ගහපු නොගහපු අපි නොදන්න පොල් තෙල් හදන ස්වාභාවික විදිය ගැන. ගහෙන් නෙලාගත්ත ස්වාභාවික කොප්පරා මෙව්ව කරලා
ඒ පුස් නේද?
ස්වාභාවික පුස්.
මීයොත් කාලානේ.
ඉතින් ස්වාභාවිකයිනේ. ඊට පස්සේ දුම් මෙව්ව කරලා
දුම් මෙව්ව කරාම ඉතින් ස්වාභාවික ගුණත් මෙව්ව වෙනවා.
ස්වභාවිකයි කියන හැමදේම පිරිසිදු නෑ. මම නම් ගන්නේ අපි දන්න පොල් තෙල්. ශරීරයට අහිතකර ටොක්සින් නැති එකම පිරිසිදු පොල් තෙල් මරීනා.
මන් දැන් කියලා දෙන්න හදන්නේ ලේබල් ගහපු නොගහපු අපි නොදන්න පොල් තෙල් හදන ස්වාභාවික විදිය ගැන. ගහෙන් නෙලාගත්ත ස්වාභාවික කොප්පරා මෙව්ව කරලා
ඒ පුස් නේද?
ස්වාභාවික පුස්.
මීයොත් කාලානේ.
ඒ ස්වාභාවිකයිනේ. ඊට පස්සේ දුම් මෙව්ව කරලා
දුම් මෙව්ව කරාම ඉතින් ස්වාභාවික ගුණත් මෙව්ව වෙනවා.
ස්වභාවිකයි කියන හැමදේම පිරිසිදු නෑ. මම නම් ගන්නේ අපි දන්න පොල් තෙල්. ශරීරයට අහිතකර ටොක්සින් නැති එකම පිරිසිදු පොල් තෙල් මරීනා.
මන් දැන් කියලා දෙන්න හදන්නේ ලේබල් ගහපු නොගහපු අපි නොදන්න පොල් තෙල් හදන ස්වාභාවික විදිය ගැන. ගහෙන් නෙලාගත්ත ස්වාභාවික කොප්පරා මෙව්ව කරලා
ඒ පුස් නේද?
ස්වාභාවික පුස්.
මීයොත් කාලානේ.
ඒ ස්වාභාවිකයිනේ. ඊට පස්සේ දුම් මෙව්ව කරලා
දුම් මෙව්ව කරාම ඉතින් ස්වාභාවික ගුණත් මෙව්ව වෙනවා.
ස්වභාවිකයි කියන හැමදේම පිරිසිදු නෑ. මම නම් ගන්නේ අපි දන්න පොල් තෙල්. ශරීරයට අහිතකර ටොක්සින් නැති එකම පිරිසිදු පොල් තෙල් මරීනා.
මන් දැන් කියලා දෙන්න හදන්නේ ලේබල් ගහපු නොගහපු අපි නොදන්න පොල් තෙල් හදන ස්වාභාවික විදිය ගැන. ගහෙන් නෙලාගත්ත ස්වාභාවික කොප්පරා මෙව්ව කරලා
ඒ පුස් නේද?
ස්වාභාවික පුස්.
මීයොත් කාලානේ.
ඒ ස්වාභාවිකයිනේ. ඊට පස්සේ දුම් මෙව්ව කරලා
දුම් මෙව්ව කරාම ඉතින් ස්වාභාවික ගුණත් මෙව්ව වෙනවා.
ස්වභාවිකයි කියන හැමදේම පිරිසිදු නෑ. මම නම් ගන්නේ අපි දන්න පොල් තෙල්. ශරීරයට අහිතකර ටොක්සින් නැති එකම පිරිසිදු පොල් තෙල් මරීනා.
මන් දැන් කියලා දෙන්න හදන්නේ ලේබල් ගහපු නොගහපු අපි නොදන්න පොල් තෙල් හදන ස්වාභාවික විදිය ගැන. ගහෙන් නෙලාගත්ත ස්වාභාවික කොප්පරා මෙව්ව කරලා
ඒ පුස් නේද?
ස්වාභාවික පුස්.
මීයොත් කාලානේ.
ඒ ස්වාභාවිකයිනේ. ඊට පස්සේ දුම් මෙව්ව කරලා
දුම් මෙව්ව කරාම ඉතින් ස්වාභාවික ගුණත් මෙව්ව වෙනවා.
ස්වභාවිකයි කියන හැමදේම මම නම් ගන්නේ අපි දන්න පොල් තෙල්. ශරීරයට අහිතකර ටොක්සින් නැති එකම පොල් තෙල් මරීනා.
මන් දැන් කියලා දෙන්න හදන්නේ ලේබල් ගහපු නොගහපු අපි නොදන්න පොල් තෙල් හදන ස්වාභාවික විදිය ගැන. ගහෙන් නෙලාගත්ත ස්වාභාවික කොප්පරා මෙව්ව කරලා
ඒ පුස් නේද?
ස්වාභාවික පුස්.
මීයොත් කාලානේ.
ඒ ස්වාභාවිකයිනේ. ඊට පස්සේ දුම් මෙව්ව කරලා
දුම් මෙව්ව කරාම ඉතින් ස්වාභාවික ගුණත් මෙව්ව වෙනවා.
ස්වභාවිකයි කියන හැමදේම පිරිසිදු නෑ. මම නම් ගන්නේ අපි දන්න පොල් තෙල්. ශරීරයට අහිතකර ටොක්සින් නැති එකම පිරිසිදු පොල් තෙල් මරීනා.
මන් දැන් කියලා දෙන්න හදන්නේ ලේබල් ගහපු නොගහපු අපි නොදන්න පොල් තෙල් හදන ස්වාභාවික විදිය ගැන. ගහෙන් නෙලාගත්ත ස්වාභාවික කොප්පරා මෙව්ව කරලා
ඒ පුස් නේද?
ස්වාභාවික පුස්.
මීයොත් කාලානේ.
ඒ ස්වාභාවිකයිනේ. ඊට පස්සේ දුම් මෙව්ව කරලා
දුම් මෙව්ව කරාම ඉතින් ස්වාභාවික ගුණත් මෙව්ව වෙනවා.
ස්වභාවිකයි කියන හැමදේම පිරිසිදු නෑ. මම නම් ගන්නේ අපි දන්න පොල් තෙල්. ශරීරයට අහිතකර ටොක්සින් නැති එකම පිරිසිදු පොල් තෙල් මරීනා.
මන් දැන් කියලා දෙන්න හදන්නේ ලේබල් ගහපු නොගහපු අපි නොදන්න පොල් තෙල් හදන ස්වාභාවික විදිය ගැන. ගහෙන් නෙලාගත්ත ස්වාභාවික කොප්පරා මෙව්ව කරලා
ඒ පුස් නේද?
ස්වාභාවික පුස්.
මීයොත් කාලානේ.
ඒ ස්වාභාවිකයිනේ. ඊට පස්සේ දුම් මෙව්ව කරලා
දුම් මෙව්ව කරාම ඉතින් ස්වාභාවික ගුණත් මෙව්ව වෙනවා.
ස්වභාවිකයි කියන හැමදේම පිරිසිදු නෑ. මම නම් ගන්නේ අපි දන්න පොල් තෙල්. ශරීර පිරිසිදු ගැන.
ගහෙන් නෙලාගත්ත ස්වාභාවික කොප්පරා මෙව්ව කරලා
ඒ පුස් නේද?
ස්වාභාවික පුස්.
මීයොත් කාලානේ.
ඒ ස්වාභාවිකයිනේ. ඊට පස්සේ දුම් මෙව්ව කරලා
දුම් මෙව්ව කරාම ඉතින් ස්වාභාවික ගුණත් මෙව්ව වෙනවා.
ස්වභාවිකයි කියන හැමදේම පිරිසිදු නෑ. මම
ඔයා රටකේ දවසින්දලා පුතා නිතරම ඔයා වහනවා. දවස් දෙකකට සැරයක්වත් කෝල් එකක් දීලා පුතාට කතන්දරයක් කියන්න.
දැන් එටිසලාට් ගාස්ටෝ.
දැන් මං ඔයාට හැමදාම කතන්දර කියන්නම්.
එටිසලාට් එතරට ළඟින් නිසා කතරක දුරත් හිතකට ළඟයි.
මහත්තයා හරි වැඩේනේ.
බාසුන්නේ මම මීටින් එක ඉන්නේ. තව ටිකකින් කතා කරන්න.
මහත්තයා සිමෙන්ති වර වෙලා.
ඇයි බාසුන්නේ කලින් කිව්වේ නැත්තේ?
සිමෙන්තිත් නැති හින්දා මහත්තයා.
එපා වැඩ නවත්තලා කොහමද? මම බාසුන්නගේ මොබයිල් එකට සල්ලි ටිකක් ඊසි කෑෂ් කරන්න. ටක් ගාලා ගිහලා සිමෙන්ති ගන්න.
හොඳයි මහත්තයා.
ඩයලොග් එටිසලාට් සහ හච් සමග මිලියන 14කට අධික ග්‍රාහකයන් සහ ඊසි කෑෂ් මගින් ගනුදෙනු කරන්න. රෙජිස්ටර් වීමට #111# ඩයල් කරන්න.
ටග්ගාලා ගිහලා සිමෙන්ති ගන්න.
හොඳයි මහත්තයා.
ඩයලොග් එටිසලාට් සහ හජ් සමග මිලියන
බාසුන්නේ කලින් කිව්වේ නැත්තේ?
සිමෙන්තිත් නැති
ටග්ගාලා ගිහලා
ග්‍රාහකයන් සහ
මහත්තයා.
බාසුන්නේ මම මීටින් එකක ඉන්නේ. තව ටිකකින් කතා කරන්න.
මහත්තයා. සිමෙන්තිවර වෙලා.
ඇයි බාසුන්නේ කලින් කිව්වේ නැත්තේ?
සිමෙන්තිත් නැති හින්දා මහත්තයා.
එපා වැඩ නවත්තලා කොහමද? මම බාසුන්නගේ මොබයිල් එකට සල්ලි ටිකක් ඊසි කෑෂ් කරන්න. ටග්ගාලා ගිහලා සිමෙන්ති ගන්න.
හොඳයි මහත්තයා.
ඩයලොග් එටිසලාට් සහ හජ් සමග මිලියන 14කට අධික ග්‍රාහකයන් සහ ඊසි කෑෂ් මගින් ගනුදෙනු කරන්න. රෙජිස්ටර් වීම එටිසලාට් සහ හජ්
සිමෙන්තිත් නැති හින්දා මහත්තයා.
ඩයලොග් එටිසලාට් සහ ඊසි
වැඩ නවත්තලා
මිලියන 14කට අධික ග්‍රාහකයන් සහ ඊසි කෑෂ් මගින් ගනුදෙනු කරන්න. රෙජිස්ටර් වීමට #111# ඩයල් කරන්න.
මහත්තයා හරි වැඩේනේ.
බාසුන්නේ මම මීටින් එකක ඉන්නේ. තව ටිකකින් කතා කරන්න.
මහත්තයා සිමෙන්තිවර වෙලා.
ඇයි බාසුන්නේ කලින් කිව්වේ නැත්තේ?
සිමෙන්තිත් නැති හින්දා මහත්තයා.
එපා සමග මිලියන 14කට අධික ග්‍රාහකයන් සහ ඊසි කෑෂ් මගින් ගනුදෙනු.
හරි වැඩේනේ.
බාසුන්නේ මම මීටින් එකක ඉන්නේ. තව ටිකකින්
ඉවර වෙලා.
කලින් කිව්වේ නැත්තේ?
සිමෙන්තිත්
ගිහලා සිමෙන්ති ගන්න.
මිලියන
ඇයි බාසුන්නේ කලින් කිව්වේ නැත්තේ?
සිමෙන්තිත් නැති හින්දා මහත්තයා.
ඩයල් කරන්න.
මහත්තයා හරි වැඩේනේ.
බාසුන්නේ මම මීටින් එකක ඉන්නේ. තව ටිකකින් කතා කරන්න.
මහත්තයා සිමෙන්තිවර වෙලා.
ඇයි බාසුන්නේ කලින් කිව්වේ නැත්තේ?
සිමෙන්තිත්
ටග්ගාලා ගිහලා සිමෙන්ති එකක ඉන්නේ. බාසුන්නේ මම මීටින් එක
සිමෙන්තිවර වෙලා.
මම බාසුන්නගේ ඩීසි කෑෂ් කරන්න. ටග්ගාලා සිමෙන්ති ගන්න.
හොඳයි මහත්තයා.
ඔබගේ තැන් ඔබගේ තැන්පතු සහ පොලිය සඳහා 100%ක පූර්ණ රාජ්‍ය වගකීම සහිත දේශයේ එකම බැංකුව. ජාතික ඉතිරි කිරීමේ බැංකුව ඔබගේ තැන්පතු සහ පොලිය සඳහා 100%ක පූර්ණ රාජ්‍ය වගකීම සහිත දේශයේ එකම බැංකුව.
හැබැයි
ශ්‍රී ලාංකිකයන්ට
into the Department of Pension and some work to see the pensioners department is now futuristic, taking much time, interesting stories that we have been experiencing with pension department during last year or 2 years time. So the first engagement that we had with pension, and then we asked, we discussed first as card, we call it a biometric ID card now. Card product, you get you have access to your without issuing a base warrant, right? So in progress of this all initiatives, and we are happy
this with 300 not pan-Asianergies
personalities as well as I believe most of you understand that change. Female, even though can population just within the 54 years time. The next doubling took only 30. Therefore, what could be the future of Sri Lankan population? Well, year 2012, the size of the population was something like over 20, much larger than we expected earlier. And in the same time, it is not only the total size of the population is changing, our sex structure also changing. In simply, the Sri Lankan population is becoming more feminized. Somewhere around 1971, we had more men in the society. So for every 100 females, we had 106 men. But now, for every 100 females, we have only 94 men. And in the coming years, we are going to observe that the more females in the society, and particularly among the elderly groups, we are going to have more females, widowed, more females. And Sri Lankan population, its structure is changing significantly from the pyramidical shape to more barrel shape or more yarn shape. And if you look at the proportion of elderly in the Sri Lankan population, 1971 of the Sri Lankan population, out of 4 are not their 60th birthday. As I mentioned to you, those who celebrate 60th birthday, if it is a female, she can live about over 20 years. A male can live about 17 years longer life. There's something called healthy life expectancy. Healthy life expectancy. And also there's something called Human Development Index. By using these ideas, I want to just show you 1 or 2 parameters. If you look at the Sri Lankan case, Sri Lankan life expectancy is roughly now approaching 72, 73 years. The combined sex, both sexes are together, the life expectancy is something like 72, 73 years. If you look at the very last column, private sector retirement is something like 55 and the state sector, which is about 60 years. Luckily we are coming from the universities, and the university academics and the judges are having privilege to go until up to 65, 66 years. But all other workers belongs to the state, they have to retire by 60. Therefore, Sri Lankan life expectancy is even above 72, 73. But bulk, 99% of our workforce has to retire either at age 60 or even before that. Therefore, they are retiring at prematurely. I tend to use this particular word, prematurely. But if you look at the Maldives, Maldives also life expectancy is more or less like Sri Lanka. But extreme right hand corner, you can observe their retirement age is something like 70 years. Retirement age is something like 70 years. And if you look at the Singapore, many countries, Malaysia and so many other countries, the important point is that in Sri Lankan case, the people are retiring prematurely. But in fact, we know that after retiring, significant number of people tend to go to the private sector and then or some self-employment they tend to work. Therefore, aging is likely to result in reduction in absolute and relative size of the working age population. And well, if you consider the macroeconomic issues, once the population is aging, savings will come down, investment will come down, it may have impact on the economic growth unless the fiscal policies are placed in right manner. And we know that pension benefits, are concerned, the government is spending large amount of money for the pensions. And very quickly, if I mention to you about the conclusions, well, in all South Asian countries except Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, but we are asking mandatory retirement is 60 years. Therefore, at the age of 60, a Sri Lankan is still healthy to work, since healthy life expectancy for Sri Lankan in 2002, even 62 years. Population aging is likely to create labor shortage in the coming years. Dependency will increase, and fiscal pressure on the annual budget of the government. I think the people who are talking about the economics will discuss about the government spending 14% on the retirement payments, and likely to more serious issue in the coming years because people tend to live much longer. Thus, increasing mandatory retirement age in Sri Lanka seems to be a long overdue issue. Therefore, I don't want to go for more discussion regarding this particular presentation. I think later on we will come for a discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank Professor, can you join us up here? Thank you for the bigger picture. May I now call upon our next presenting panelist, Dr. Nisha Arunathilake. She is a research fellow and head of labor, employment and human resources development related research at the Institute of Policy Studies, IPS. She will talk about old age income security programs in Sri Lanka, which is another part of the bigger picture we are trying to present initially. Nisha?
Are you ready for your retirement? Do you have a financial plan for it? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be talking about pensions, both in terms of its coverage and its adequacy. We'll first talk about pensions. Actually, the first part Professor Harsha de Silva already spoke about, so I will skip over it very fast. And then I'll talk about the existing pension schemes, how well they cover the elderly population, and the adequacy of those pension schemes. And lastly, I will talk about if we are to extend pensions to everybody in the population, the cost of that. So, why do we talk about pensions? As Professor Harsha de Silva just mentioned, population is aging, especially the elderly portion of the population, not just the 60 plus, but also the 70 plus proportion of the population is increasing. And also, as Professor Harsha de Silva just mentioned, it is becoming more female. There are, for every 100 elderly females, there are only 81 elderly males right now. And in 2030, there's going to be even less elderly males for every 100 elderly females. So it is, there is a gender dimension to this problem. But most of the pensions programs in the country today, they are employment based. But many of the females are not in employment. For example, throughout their lifespan, not even half of the females are at any given age group, not even half of the females are in employment. So if we have a pension scheme, pension system, which is employment based, we are missing out a whole lot of the population who needs pensions the most. So what are the existing pension schemes? You can categorize the existing pension schemes into main 4 schemes. First, there are the public sector pension schemes. These are the ones some of you may be already receiving, given to the public servants, also the armed forces, and the widows and widowers and orphans pension scheme, and also the provident fund for public servants. And then there are the private sector pension schemes. I put it within quotation marks because it's not really a pension scheme. It is just a lump sum given to you at retirement. So it's not really a pension scheme. So the rest of my presentation, I will not really be talking about the private sector pension scheme, although there are now schemes given by private banks. Those are different, but in general, the private sector, formal private sector, we do not have a pension scheme in Sri Lanka right now. Then we have the informal sector pension schemes. There are the farmers' pension schemes. The first one started in 1987, and since then we got pension schemes for fishermen, and then for the migrant workers, and all kinds of trades. They started pension schemes, but a lot of them were not sustainable. You may have read in the newspapers, the farmers' pension scheme, for example, ran out of money. So they were not able to pay the pensions for a whole year, and then it got started again. So there is an issue about sustainability of the informal sector pension schemes. And then we also have elderly assistance schemes. These are just transfer payments given to who are poor. So they are just transfer payments. So who's funding these? Public sector pension schemes are funded by the Treasury, and also the elderly assistance schemes are funded by the Treasury. Private sector is a contributory one. It's jointly contributed to by the employer and the employee. And the informal sector schemes are contributory but subsidized by the government. So this is where the sustainability issue comes in, because it is a contributory informal sector, and if you don't plan it out properly, you might run out of money and it will not be sustainable. So what share of population is covered? Now when we talk about pensions, I told you they are employment based. So who is covered? Now, for example, the public servants, if you are a permanent public servant, you are automatically covered. So 100% of those who are permanent public servants are covered by the pension scheme that is there for the public servants. But in terms of farmers, there is a definition for farmers. So only if you are a farmer, according to that definition, you are first eligible for that pension. And even of those who are eligible, not everybody wants it's a contributory scheme. So some may not be willing to contribute towards that pension scheme. So not everybody who is eligible is covered. And also of the ones who are eligible and also enrolled, some are not effectively enrolled because they might not continue to contribute towards the scheme. So then they become ineffective. So, for example, in the farmers' pension scheme, only 64% of those eligible are enrolled in the scheme, and out of that also only 38% are effectively covered. So totally in Sri Lanka, 5 million people are eligible for some kind of pension scheme. But of that, only 1.4 million are effectively to pay, so they are not effectively enrolled in the pension scheme. So next question I want to ask is, how adequate are the pensions? Now one way of looking at it, adequacy depends on what kind of lifestyle you want to lead, as Dr. Harsha de Silva said in the morning. But at the very least, it should keep you out of poverty. So on average, for example, a civil servant gets a pension which is about 16,000 rupees. And a person in the armed forces on average again gets about 11,000 rupees. But if you're in the farmers' pension scheme, you get only about 1,499 on average. And self-employed get only 1,000 rupees. So the poverty line for the same year, I think it's 2013, was 3,781, which means, you can see the line there, only those in the public sector pension schemes get a pension amount which is above the poverty line. Everybody else who are in the informal sector schemes are getting a pension which is less than even half of the poverty line. So that is not enough to keep them out of poverty. The second thing we need to think about is, now a lot of these pension schemes, they are telling you the benefit amounts in nominal terms. They will say you will get 1,000 rupees when you are 60. But what is that? Because if you are 18 and you are told that you will get 1,000 rupees when you are 60, what is that in today's terms? For example, in the farmers' pension scheme, if you are 18 and if you are enrolling, they tell you that you will get 4,167 rupees when you are 60. But in today's terms, if you take 5% inflation and if you are getting your pension starting at 60, that means you are only getting 537 rupees as a pension in today's terms. So how costly is it to extend this pension to everybody? Now I told you only 13% of the population 18 to 59 is covered by any pension scheme. How costly is it to cover everybody? I mean, that depends on what do you mean by everybody. Is it people who are 70 plus, 65 plus, or 60 plus? For example, if you take those who are 70 plus, if you just want to cover everybody who are 70 plus, In 2015, there were about 6% of the population was 70 plus. If you are to give them, and also it depends on the amount of the pension you want to give them. I mean, international standard is that you should at least give them 20% of the per capita GDP as a pension. That's the rule of thumb. So if you are to give them 20% of the per capita GDP, you will need 1.2% of the GDP to provide everybody who is 70 plus a pension. Can we afford it? Well, I think maybe you can, because already the pensions department is spending 1.4% of the GDP providing pensions. The problem is most of that is going to the public sector. So if you rethink that and if you rework it out, maybe you can. So this is something to talk about. So lastly, I just want to summarize. If you look at the 60 and above population, about 50% of the people are not receiving any kind of pension. And only 20% are receiving public sector pensions, 5% informal sector, and then 5% are getting these transfer payments from the government. And as I showed you earlier, only the public sector pensions are enough to keep you out of poverty. So in effect, only 20% of the pensioners are receiving a pension that is enough to keep them out of poverty. All the rest of them, we need to think about expanding pensions to cover rest of the population in terms of coverage and in terms of adequacy.
Thanks, Nisha. Please join us on stage. So, as you can see, lots of gaps in our social safety nets. May I now invite Mr. Murthaza Jafferjee. He is the Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director at JB Securities Private Limited. He'll talk to us about the ideal retirement system. While waiting for him, we have started receiving questions by Twitter. So we are noting them, and when the time comes, I will present some questions to our panelists. So please keep the questions coming both by Twitter as well as to the SMS number.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You'll be wondering what I'm doing here. I'm not speaking to you in the capacity of my business, but I'm also a member of professional. The financial system was broken, so they felt that they had to address a lot of issues at the policy level, and they set up a research arm to come up with policy positions in which that they could put forward to regulators and governments how future policy has to be crafted. So it is in that context that they contracted an HR consultancy firm called Mercer globally to prepare a report called An Ideal Retirement System. So my presentation today is to share with you the findings of that report. The first is that it is titled An Ideal Retirement System. There is no such thing as an ideal retirement system. So this is basically a framework that every country has to debate out and craft a system that is suitable for the local context. So what are the retirement challenges? First is low levels of individual savings. These are voluntary savings. Employer plans in developed markets are transitioning. So in most developed countries, they have defined benefit plans, very similar to our public sector pension system, where basically you are given a defined benefit over the course of your retirement. But most countries, and because it is employer sponsored, it is not viable anymore. And most countries, most example is companies like General Motors that went bankrupt because of their entitlements, specifically in retirement and healthcare. So most companies have moved away from defined benefit systems to defined contributory systems. The defined contributory systems are like our EPF. there is also a lack of political will to make the necessary reforms, because invariably one group of people will lose out during the changes, and all politicians know that they have to be elected back. So nobody is willing to bail the cat in case they don't get elected back. So it's not only something that happens to our politicians, but it is a global phenomenon. It's food. In retirement, are you going to say that I work for food? So the total investment assets globally are about $62 trillion. That is the accumulated savings assets in the globe. Out of that, $30 million are through retirement systems. So you see a lot of investment that comes in the portfolio form. Either they buy government securities or they invest in our equity markets. A lot of that is driven by pension assets coming from developed markets. So when they asked, they did a survey and asked people who will manage your pension assets. A vast majority of the people said that they would like to manage it themselves because they had lost the trust in a formal investment industry. And the asset managers only represented 7%. Of course, in Sri Lanka, we don't have that option, because if you take the contributory system, main one, which is the EPF, there is some private systems. Mainly it is one entity which is managed by the central bank, so there is really no choice. And CFA members globally were asked what are the underestimated risks over the 5 years. The second most important and the third most important factors was about pension plans and the demographic transition, because globally people are getting older. So you can rank superannuation systems globally on 3 factors: adequacy, sustainability, and the integrity of the system. And there was a global survey done, and it's interesting to see who are the countries that ranked the highest. A small country called Denmark got the highest score, followed by Australia, which is an excellent superannuation system, Netherlands, Finland. So it's a lot of European countries that have got an ideal system. And you can see that the Asian countries really are not the top ranking systems. So this is the report that was produced. For anybody who is interested, I have shared it with the pension department so they can email it to you. So no country can have an ideal system, that it has to be tailored according to a country's economic, cultural, political, historic and capital markets. So what are the key elements that need to be looked at? Some of it the speakers before have spoken about, but for brevity let me repeat it. High coverage within the private pension system. So more people get covered. My sense is that there are about 8.8 million people in the labor force, about 1.3 million people in the public service, and about 2.4 million people who contribute to the EPF. So vast majority, the majority which is about maybe 55 to 60% have no coverage at all. Mandatory contributions of at least 8% of earnings. So our system is that we contribute about 20% for the contributory systems, about 20% to the EPF and 3% to the ETF, so it's 23%. But that is based on your basic salary. And although even allowances are, you have to deduct EPF, many people are dodging that. You know, they structure it in a way where EPF deductions are not deducted. So probably the effective rate will probably be about 12 to 14%, but it's still above the recommended 8%. At least 60% of earnings net replacement rate for medium income earners. So the replacement rate is the rate of your final retiring income that you need to have an adequate style of living. It is estimated that you need about 60% in Sri Lanka. If you take EPF balances, it's a hell of a lot less, that because the extended period of retirement. Funded assets for the future greater than 100% of a country's GDP. Now, the public pension system is unfunded. Right? It's a pay-as-you-go system. So you tax today's generation to pay for those in retirement. And what happens is that when the demographics catch up with you, you have more and more people in retirement, then basically the burden on the system increases. because fewer people working have to support more people in retirement. And our system from the government is not funded. I don't know whether anybody has recently done an estimate of what that unfunded liability was, but at one point of time when it was done, it was estimated to be about 40 to 45% of GDP. And if you take the contributory system, the EPF, its total assets are about 1.5 trillion, and our economy is about 10 trillion. So about 15% of GDP is in the funding. Now the best practice is that the funded amount must be at least 100% of GDP. So basically we have a system that at least has some coverage, but the sustainability is the issue because it is not funded. And even the EPF, although it's a contributory system, 90% of the money has been lent to the government basically. So it's a future taxpayer that has to be able to pay that. A basic pension for poor of at least 25% of the average earner. So Nisha mentioned 20% of GDP per capita, but if you take it at an income level, the wage earner level, it's a slightly higher amount. A strong regulatory framework that leads to improved governance and better protection of members. We don't have a superannuation regulator in this country. We have a Department of Pensions that pay the government pension, and then we have the central bank who manages the money and the labor department who manages the contributory system, but there is no independent regulator. It's one and the same. Yeah, okay. So I'm not going to have a lot of time. So there were 10 basic elements. The 4-pillar approach, a basic public pension for everybody, a mandatory fully funded system for working years, a voluntary funded system, and your own personal savings. The second pillar is a minimum level of funding for all workers. So an ideal system would have a replacement rate of about 65 to 80%, a lifetime approach to contributions, and retirement savings need to include contributions from income replacement. So basically, if you say that if you have a universal health system, you probably need a slightly less replacement rate because the healthcare costs are taken care of, which is like in Sri Lanka. Cost-effective and attractive default arrangements before and after retirement. So actually a lot of our public system is by default everybody joins. That's what Nisha showed, that the eligibility and enrollment rate was very high there. But in the voluntary system there was a big gap. It was not by default. And the EPF is by default, it's mandatory that if you are a permanent worker you have to contribute to the system. Administration and investment costs should be disclosed with some competition present to encourage fair pricing. Very poor disclosure in Sri Lanka. You have periodic disclosure, especially the contributory system, and there's absolutely no competition. It's one monolithic system. Flexibility as individual personal and financial circumstances vary. So basically what that means is that in your government pension system, it's a defined amount that you get paid. There is no provision to draw down some of your benefit. But I think what Mr. Hettiarachchi has done is that he has tied up with banks and allowed you to draw against that. So it's a workable solution. He has brought in flexibility in a very creative way. Benefits provided during retirement should have an income focus. So basically it should have an income focus, but then as I said in the previous slide, that you should be able to take out a lump sum from it. Contributions or accrued benefits at the required minimum level must have immediate vesting. So what does that mean? There is no portability. So the best practice says that it should vest immediately from the very first day. Whatever benefits that have accrued to you, it should come to you and it should be portable. So that means that if you leave the government service, you should be able to take that benefit with you and go. Taxation support from government in an equitable and sustainable way. So here in the contributory system, your EPF, your pay tax is not based on your gross salary. It is after deduction of your EPF. So it is a tax neutral system. So it is quite literally a deductible item, and even the benefits, up to 5 million of benefits are not taxable. After that, the marginal one is taxable at 5% and then at 10%. So we have actually a very fair tax regime. the ninth, and I have one more point, the governance of pension plan should be independent from the government and any employer control, right? So one issue, certainly the pension department is an arm of the government, and the EPF is also completely managed by the central bank. Now the problem with the EPF is basically it's a private sector that is contributing it but managed by the government. So in most systems you will have an independent regulator, but it will be managed by independent people. Finally, appropriate regulation, including prudential regulation of pension plans and some protection for pension scheme members. So on that point, because my time is up, I will end my talk.
Thanks. Please join us on stage. Can I now invite our three remaining panelists also to join us on stage. Dr. Nisha Mel, who's the Executive Director and Head of Research at Verite Research. Mr. Shah Rauf, Managing Director of AIA Life Insurance, and Mr. Sunil Hettiarachchi, Director General of the Department of Pensions. Gentlemen. So what I'd like to do is to give these three panelists 5 minutes each to tell us, give us some opening remarks. They can respond to what we've just heard or present their own perspectives. Can we start with you, Nishan?
Thank you very much, Nalaka. I think the speakers have said so much, they've left very little for us to add. Let me use the 5 minutes I have to say a few words first about the civil service pension scheme, the government pension scheme, and then about the EPF, which is potentially a pension scheme also, if you convert the lump sum that you get at retirement into an annuity. So just to summarize, I think the issues raised about the civil service pension scheme that I find very important is one, that it's not funded. So you don't put aside, as Murthaza said, the money today that is required to pay the person when they retire tomorrow. Not only is it not funded that way, but it is also not costed, which means that there is no recognition in government accounting or budgeting about how much it will cost tomorrow to pay the pension that is due tomorrow. The consequence of not funding and not costing is that it's very easy to make promises about increasing the pension scheme. You can, when there's an election year, you can say, I'm increasing the pension to all the pensioners, because you don't have to put aside that money. So we say that politicians don't have to put the money where their mouth is. That is very dangerous for governance. We are talking about good governance. So look at, how costly it is. Murthaza asked, how do you cost this? And calculations I've done in the past. The most recent calculations I have, I just back up the envelope based on the fact that we are spending, if you look at 10 years ago now, it fluctuates between 1 and 2% of GDP to pay the civil service pension scheme. Let's take it at 1.5%. That's equivalent to, at today's interest rates, servicing a debt of 25% of GDP. So if you say that you're servicing debt at about 6%, if you put aside, you'd have to borrow 25% of GDP, and the cost of servicing that is the same as the cost of the civil service pension today. So that is a very large amount of money that is taken from taxes, okay, the equivalent of paying for 25% of GDP to pay the current civil service pension, and those costs could keep changing because employment in the government sector has radically increased over the last 10 years. Those people are not yet retired. So when they retire tomorrow, that cost could go up. So the problem with the government civil service pension scheme is, one, lots of people have talked about, Dr. Indralal mentioned that the retirement age may be too low. The problem with that is what we call the passivity ratio. That is the percentage of years in retirement compared to the percentage of years in work. So supposing, as you retire at retirement age, that passivity ratio keeps increasing. And it becomes unsustainable. You can't pay a worthwhile pension for a person for that long. So even though the civil service pension scheme replaces up to 90% of income on retirement, there is a problem of indexing. So as Nisha said, if it's not inflation indexed, the real value of that pension can go down after time. But pensioners are voters. So what happens is, as the number of pensioners in the population increases, the government is under pressure to arbitrarily increase the pension amount because cost of living has gone up. The promises that they make today have to be met only tomorrow, and we can set ourselves up for a very serious crisis if we don't adjust and reform the system. I have only about 1 minute left, so let me say a few things about the EPF and stop. I think one of the major problems about the EPF is also, as Murthaza said, how it's managed. Provident Fund put money in the stock market and managed to get so little in return from the stock market that even the ETF, every other index, every other investment in the stock market outdid the EPF's investment in the stock market, which means it was very, very badly managed. So irresponsible management of the funds can mean that the benefits to the workers are lower at the end, and there is no independent mechanism to make sure that the management is responsible as yet. So when we calculated this about 20 years ago, we realized 60% of salary, but the EPF isn't able to replace that required amount. Lastly, let me say, with the EPF, one opportunity to create a pension out of the EPF is to have the private sector competitively provide pension as a monthly payment. Or here's how I will index it to inflation. Today, a lot of people use the word pension, but they're not offering you a pension. They're offering you a long-term savings system. It'll only last till you're 75 or 60 or 65, 70. So there's some limit to that. More complex the public sector as well. Thank you, Nalika.
Thanks. So we realize that we have to increasingly raise the sophistication of this whole discussion on pension options and schemes. Is insurance one of them? Can we hear from you, Mr. Sharaf?
Thank you very much. I think one of the speakers said, opened with my particular company. We have, there's two famous years in my mental map of pensions evolution. 1980 is the first year. You saw one of the speakers put up 4 pillars. The first pillar being a mandatory or rather a social security minimum pension system. A second pillar being the mandatory system for everybody to contribute to, no choice. Third pillar is a voluntary system. And the fourth pillar is any other savings that you might have got to build up a fund from which, whether it's through an annuity or through a drawdown, you have your pension income and the replacement ratio of that, whatever it might be. In 1980, Chile introduced the first 2 pillars. The first time it was done. It was on the back of a World Bank paper. And in Chile, they did away with the pay-as-you-go system you've heard criticized so much, and rightly so, and they introduced a 2-pillar system, the first 2 pillars I mentioned. The political debate wasn't much of an issue because the gentleman who introduced it was called General Pinochet, and he was the one person who was ruling the country, so there wasn't much of a debate. So it worked very nicely. And then the rest of the South American countries followed. The reason I'm saying that story is because Sri Lanka is in a very, very lucky position. We cannot compare Sri Lanka to the rest of South Asia because Sri Lanka inevitably has a much higher life expectancy, morbidity, mortality rate, which is, I think, must be the envy of the rest of South Asia. It's comparable to Europe, comparable to South America, comparable to a lot of developed countries. Therefore, our pension system, a new one where we have to start again, has to be comparable to those countries. The next year I want to talk about is 1999. What happened? I mentioned Australia. Australia has a wonderful superannuation system, exactly like the EPF, but with a competitive providers, not one government provider. But Dr. Harsha this morning mentioned that Sri Lankans, the EPF matures and they spend it on their daughter's wedding. Australians aren't any different. They don't spend it on their daughter's wedding. They take their lump sum and go on expensive holidays and buy cars. So human nature, human habit means any pension system will evolve. And in Sri Lanka, we need to make a start. It'll evolve, but we have all the right elements of it. And a key element of that is a role that we can play in the private.
$14 billion rupee man. Every month, on average, there's a lot of money you are paying out. So tell us your perspective, from where you stand.
Nalaka, I think I agree with this, all the research fellows. I think we had nice discussion yesterday with you that my thinking is, yes, government can go and go, but no one is to stop this. But we have to think loudly, as this mentioned. We are thinking the option. There are many options, as he mentioned, 3-pillar, 4-pillar, 5-pillar system. Otherwise, I don't know what the word is. Otherwise, something will happen. So my way is, I always see the sustainable framework to the nation, but as Dr. Nisha mentioned, there should be an inclusive system. He said only 20 or 25% is the coverage down there. No, the 80% are.
Pensions are covered in one system, but is it safe in our kind of governance situation to put all our pension eggs in one large basket? I'm going to ask from all our panelists. Is this kind of developed first world ideal standard?
So that was going to become unsustainable. So the inherent subsidies were so high but invisible, because when we sat and costed it, we realized it, but the government wasn't costing it and publishing. Ideally, you also cost it and you fund it. So you put aside that money, like you put it in an EPF.
Do you want to add to that?
Then I think
I will do. I shouldn't. You're absolutely right. Also, I think I'll come back to that in just a second. I think a lot of the very developed economies, like Japan, the UK, Germany, etc., they have a lot of legacy. Issue you mentioned. I've heard a lot of people saying the problems of pricing, the expertise required is huge. And then you have to trust that assumption set. That's where the independence of the governance comes into it. But don't underestimate how difficult it is. If that person doing the pricing does not have a vested interest, political or otherwise, especially if it's a shareholder interest, they have to make some money from that activity. Believe you me, that pricing is a lot more accurate than someone who doesn't have to make any money from it.
Right. So one of you, I think it was Murthaza, who mentioned the regulator's role in this. Now, should we be looking at, in time to come when things are being streamlined, an independent, competent regulator for the pension sector, just as we've now established functional regulators for the telecom sector and insurance sector, for example? Is this an ideal to work towards?
So I'm going to sound like an old broken record, because I've been beating the drum for the last 15 years. And the last time that I tried to get the policymakers to listen to this was back in 2002. This was a time when the World Bank was quite active on this pension reform issue. And in 2004, we set up something called the Office for Pension Reform. And I believe the World Bank was agreeable to give about $1 million to fund it, because the amount of expertise in the country is really lacking. This is a multi-dimensional problem. So only problem was the government changed and it was located in the Ministry of Finance and the office was closed down. So it's such a tragedy that, and the problem is it's like a ticking bomb, because your population is aging and there are two issues that happen, that the number of people who are pensionable or becoming senior citizens are increasing, so they become politically active. Second thing is that accumulation of savings, a lot of it is a compounding of returns. So you don't allow time that can solve a lot of those problems to play. So long and short answer is yes, we need a regulator. It has to be an independent regulator. Yeah. But with all regulation, in any market system, the regulatory people have to be extremely competent, because it's a very technical area and multi-skilled. So we need to start work on this immediately.
Right. Maybe the word reform is a little contentious. I have been using the term streamline, which also means the same thing. Maybe this is also a challenge of managing perceptions as we go along. But looking around in our region, I'm going to take the audience questions in a minute. By looking around in our region, the government of India established a pension fund regulatory and development authority about a decade ago. And it has a national pension system that was launched in 2009, or about 6 years ago. And the NPS has been provided for all citizens of the country, including the unorganized sector. Now, how do we, because given how large our own informal or unorganized sector is, how do we bring them in? Now, in India, it's on a voluntary basis. But what kind of incentives, what kind of marketing and promotion is there for self-employed or informally employed people to consider their tomorrow when they are struggling with today, many of them? Sunil, do you want to have a go at it?
Nalaga, right now there is another organization we call Social Security Board, especially that was established for the self-employed people. That is a contributory one. We have to select what they are when you are going to retire, but they are expecting according they have to select it. Even that I think all the banks are recently launched the product. No, that was the same thing. Anyone can get the membership, or anyone can enroll and pay, and they cover their security. The systems are there. I think even anything happen, we call market failures. So we have the government and intervene, and the government promote it. No, that's the democratic role of the governance. That is therefore I think government has role even in the private state intervention are there. Government has promote it. You have to safeguard, as you mentioned, there is a regulator. The other way we have to have our legal system even without. Even regulator can't do anything, but our legal system should be transparent. There's accountable. Those kind of things also government look after. Even this sector, government intervention is needed. Even private sector can run the business as a business model, but even government intervention is still there. This is my view.
Right. Coming to the two of you, Singapore's pension system has been sometimes described as demography safe. Can any pension scheme be demography safe? Is that conceptually possible, Prof?
Yeah, as far as I remember, Singapore has increased the retirement age until up to 67. And well, before that there were a lot of discussions about whether to increase to 65 or 67 and so on. But I think they have looked at very carefully. As far as I know, around 30-40% of the Singapore labor force is coming from the other countries, and also they have estimated the life expectancies of the native Singaporeans and also those who are coming from other countries, and also they came to a conclusion that it may be very worthwhile to go for a 67. Therefore, what I am saying is that countries like Singapore, where their labor force is even 30-40% is foreigners, but they work as more of like a residents. Therefore, when we are preparing a pension scheme, but it won't apply to the Sri Lanka. However, even in Sri Lanka, there are some population groups, life expectancies are somewhat lower compared to the national level. Therefore, we have to look at particularly like the estate sector. The life expectancies are a bit lower. However, it is not significantly lower compared to the national. But the Singapore example is very good for the Sri Lankan scenario also.
So you think we should study that?
We should study that also.
Nisha, do you want to add to that? All right. But coming to the fact that you've been involved in some of the regional collective efforts through the UN, ESCAP and other agencies, the World Bank, to look at how developing Asian countries are responding to the pensions challenge. Do you want to share some additional perspectives? Comparatively, how are our neighbors or those in Southeast Asia doing? Not perhaps Singapore, because that's a developed country now. What about middle income countries like us? How are they handling this?
I think what they are concentrating is basically improving capacity to think about pensions, as Nisha and some of the others mentioned. We just don't know how to plan for pensions. We just, politicians come and say, okay, we're going to give a pension for these farmers or fishermen, but they don't plan. So they are more talking about how to properly plan it and how to price it so that it is sustainable over a long period of time. And
going back to the question you asked earlier about informal sector workers, given the sort of work that they do, unlike us, they don't get a salary at the end of the month, it's very variable. I don't think it is really sustainable to get them to contribute towards a pension scheme. It should be voluntary, but then you should accept that they might not be able to do it over a long period of time. There might be gaps. So if you go for this 4-pillar option, that first pillar, social security pension, I think that should be treasury funded. There is no, especially in a country like Sri Lanka where 60% of the workers are in the informal sector, you can't expect a contributory scheme to take over that first pillar. So that, and already we are spending about 1.4% of our GDP on pensions. So we need to rethink that, how to allocate it that so that everybody gets some basic, what they call a bread and butter pension, and the jam and all the rest of the things can come later.
Right. But the GDP itself keeps growing and expanding. So what if the GDP growth rate outpaces the demand for pension payments? Then can we hope to have at least a few years of breathing space until the streamlining is done?
So that's where the technical part comes in. I think you really need to have the capacity to think through that. How much of a pension can we afford as a social security pension? Is it 20% of your per capita GDP, or is it a lesser amount, or whatever the amount that you can afford, you must figure it out and offer it. So that's where I think UNESCAP is also talking about giving. And the other thing is we don't have information. Even if you have the technical capability, unless we get the information about the pensioners and the working age people, we can't work out these numbers. So
yeah, please.
You are asking whether there can be a national pension system for everybody.
Yeah.
So there are two things. One is that she already mentioned that there is an income transfer going on, something like 2,000 rupees. And famously, Lee Kuan Yew said that the Sri Lankan elections is an auction of non-existing resources. So basically, if the number of people above the age of 60 are going to increase, they yet have a vote. So invariably, competitive politics means that one political party will go and say, I will give you more. And by default, it will become a national pension system. So the only problem is that you're going to have an intergenerational conflict because a future generation will have to pay for this.
Yeah. Without thinking through how is it going to be paid.
It's better to take steps from this so that the generational burden is going to be paid by this generation. And as Nishan said, he talked about costing. But I call it, it's not a question of expensing it alone, but there should be a definite contribution out of the budget, a cash contribution, because in accounting there's a difference between accruing and making an explicit cash contribution. So if we are making promises to future generations, we must, or current generation, we must make sure that this generation pays for that. And therefore the money has to be taken out of the budget and kept aside in a separate superannuation fund that doesn't necessarily go and fund the budget deficit again because you're taking from one hand and giving it to the other hand.
Yeah.
Then basically it will be a more sustainable system.
Okay, can we have the questions on screen, please? The ones that have been received. Tech support team. You were flashing the questions on screen a few minutes ago. I saw a couple of questions that had come in from you. Yes. So let's pick out one or two, and then perhaps if time permits, also open it out for voice questions. Would you like to answer? Why should people pay? Is that the one?
No,
or the first one?
very first.
Okay, the question is funded schemes have to...
Even before that.
Oh, can we go to the...
He knows the question.
Okay, all right. First question.
The question is that whether to retirement age need to be increased to 65. I think it may be not very worth decision. Probably in Sri Lankan context, what we can do is that extend the retirement age by 2 years first and observe the implications and then move later on to 65. rather than increasing step by step, just jumping 5 years would not be very appropriate. That is my observation looking at many other countries. And also, since most of our Social Security Board, I don't know whether any member representing the Social Security Board, because I have studied some of the Social Security Board's pension scheme, except one or two, bulk of the schemes are not very successful. Perhaps bulk of our workers very happy to enter into the government service because there's a full coverage pension scheme. But other government fund, the Social Security or government managed kind of Social Security Board pension schemes are not very successful. Therefore, people themselves in our culture, probably they are very much like to depend on the family for the social protection. And people do not have much thoughts about pensionable age and retirement age and the pension benefits. Majority of the people who are coming from the self-employment sector.
We don't, just to add to the Professor's comment, we don't have a common language for discussing pensions, and the Professor has picked up exactly that point. When you say to people in Sri Lanka, what is the retirement age? Different people give different answers. We don't have a common national language. It'd be great whether it's the EPF, whether it's a state sector, whether it's a private sector, to say, in Sri Lanka, we retire at 65 or 67, whatever the age is. Then you can then have a dialogue. What are you doing to plan for it? Because they're linked. If you don't have a common language, you can't have a common discussion. The same with the framework. If you have a framework, then we can talk, you and I can have a conversation about how are you planning to meet those needs. Because at the moment it's too vague, and it's something people would like to put off. No one likes to think about these things. And I would say in that context, the number one system, before we come up with a wonderful solution and a framework, there is a solution in the meantime, which is we have to take personal accountability for our own retirement. Until the government comes out with a wonderful solution, we have to take our own personal responsibility for it. And just the Professor, as he was speaking, because it was his presentation, that gap between the female and male, and the males are the workers, that is very scary. If anything happens to that male, then there is no pension, there is no income for the female partner, the female wife. So we've got issues within issues that can only be answered by taking personal accountability for our family's own financial needs and planning.
Nisha?
Yeah, what do you mean by retirement age to 65? Who is retiring in this country? Only the public servants are retiring. No one else is retiring.
They keep working.
And why do we want to increase retirement age? Okay, it is to reduce the pension bill, but then on the other hand, we are paying the public sector workers salaries. And those are very high salaries because, the older workers get higher salaries. So you're just shifting the budget from the pensions budget to the salary budget. So I think we really need to rethink this, increasing the retirement age.
Yeah, I mean,
if you're talking about a contributory system, maybe you can think about it.
The elephant in the room we haven't acknowledged is that we have a very large public service, 1.5 million for 20 million population, and it keeps increasing. It's not very rationalized. It's increased enormously in the last decade.
On the other hand, you have the university graduates who are coming out of the university, and every year they are wanting to get into the public service.
Right.
Or they are going to say, no, the public service is full, we are going to keep everybody.
Right. So I'm glad you flagged it, although we don't have the scope to discuss that. That's a big challenge by itself. Another question to look at, what's the Department of Pensions plan to continue this discussion? Sunil, any quick thoughts on where we go from this day and this forum?
Nalaka, I think already the Prime Minister Office has established one unit for looking at this kind of thing. I think he mentioned that World Bank is also advising to think of the incorporated this. I think this dialogue is without stopping going continuation until get the results. I think therefore, but as a department, even our team, with the support of this kind of research people, we can be a catalyst to this kind of that ad hoc, not ad hoc, I think it's very established system. I think this here, that the convener also with us today, that is very established institution. I think this dialogue will go ahead until result.
What's the time frame? I mean, these are big issues that you have to resolve.
I can't exactly say what is the time frame, but I'm only a member of that committee.
Right.
That committee has proceeded. I think after this 2 or 3 days, we are meeting again. We are going to prepare the action plan. I don't know this, but in future we'll be able to share with the participant with that the issue of that time frame and everything.
Right. Organizers, tell me whether we have time to take any verbal, oral questions from the audience. And if so, our mics, already hands are showing. Can we have mics either going to them, or do we have standby mics? There's one in front here. Sir, do you mind coming up and using this mic? Okay, you are loud enough. Tell us. Okay.
Coming back to the other point, I want to raise one more.
Very quickly, sir.
Yeah, 1 minute. Now, everybody was talking about the politics. You were talking about the big picture. You have to look at the big picture and take decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So there was another hand going up there. Is it a question or a comment? Question, very briefly, sir.
Yeah, just actually, I'm Samir Aliyanage from Sansa Development Bank as the Assistant General Manager. I'm in my capacity.
Keep the mic closer.
Yeah. What my suggestion is to make these pensioners, either informal sector people, into entrepreneurs. That's the main objective. What we have launched from our SDB. What we need is the value chain financing. Though we have said to become an entrepreneur or to finance or to give loans, but to have a sustainable development, we have to fund that chain. We have started with a small scale, but we need policy makers to think about value chain finance as well.
Okay, so is there a response to that? Yeah, so that's again a comment. Thank you. Okay, there's a question. Okay. Political authority represents general public. They promote public needs. So can we just neglect politicians or can we complain on their decisions? Panel? Anyone? It's a very broad question.
So whoever asked that question is someone who obviously is optimistic, but also doesn't understand the generational problem that pensions raises. So political decision making, as Murthaza has said, all of us has said, responds to the people who can vote today. A pension decision affects people who can't vote today, people who are not even born today. So obviously, when the people who are affected can't vote, you can't get a democratic decision. So the idea that political decision making responds to the public who are affected is actually, the assumption of the question, I'm afraid, is incorrect. Secondly, you have to realize that in an ideal democracy, political decision making is constantly dynamic and responsive to the needs of the people. That means you will not get any different behavior in an election year than you get throughout the period because political decision making is responsive. If you look around in what happens in Sri Lanka, election years, we bust all our deficits. We have policies that completely contradict what happened in the past years. We bring down prices, which suggests that political decision making is actually not functioning in the way that this question anticipates, right? So just because you go to vote every 5 years or 6 years, don't imagine that you are able to influence political decision making in a way that is to the benefit of the public. That happens when civil society, media, information, and understanding of the implications of decisions are well understood in the population. Democracy, the price of democracy is a constantly aware and vigilant population. If you don't have that, you're not going to get this. So I'm glad for the optimism, and I hope you're working to make this happen. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions orally from the, yes, back there, sir?
Mr. Jafferjee said that some employers are evading the EPF payments by making them as allowances. Now, some private sector employers only pay in allowances to completely evade this. So how can we make this, how can we rectify this? Should they be brought to justice, or what can be done?
Well, that's a procedural question. I'm not sure whether we need to go into that level here, unless you want to quickly respond.
No, so I looked at the EPF Act, and basically most allowances you have to pay EPF contribution, including food. Including food. But the problem here is that the person who's contributing has to feel that his money going into the EPF is secure, it's working for him. Then he will force his employer to deduct, because the employer's contribution is much more. So the problem is that most people don't view the EPF as a really directly a contributory savings system. They kind of view it as a tax. So the EPF has a perception problem that they need to fix.
While on the subject of EPF, ETF, the central bank governor very recently said that EPF and ETF will be merged to provide more benefits to the people in the private sector. His words as reported in the state media. Now, do we know whether that's already a decision made or under consideration? Merging EPF, ETF. Does anyone on the panel know?
I don't have the answer to your question, but I want to dispel a myth. I went and read the ETF Act, and somebody who's knowledgeable explained it was never supposed to be a pure superannuation system. It was the brainchild of Lalita Atulat Mudali somewhere in the 1970s or 80s, where it was a giant, like a private equity or venture fund, because the private sector was undeveloped at that time. So basically it created the fund base to invest in the private sector. And initially, when you go back 25 years ago, they had invested in Colombo dockyards and Dankoto porcelain and all. Over the years, the whole objective of it got hijacked, and it became a passive financing thing for the fiscal deficit. So basically, if you're going to merge the two, then basically you're saying that the original objective of why it was set up is now no longer valid.
Right, but we don't have clarification from the government what exactly is going to be done.
So basically the problem here is that the ETF is managed by the Ministry of Finance for the Labour Department.
Yeah.
The EPF is managed by the central bank.
Right.
So basically you have to be a bit careful when people say things whether they can speak for other people.
Exactly. So some precautions. There are any more questions? We could take a couple of more and then we'll start to wind up. Yes, sir.
We have a big part to play. And I go back to the optimistic picture. If, as someone has suggested, there is a way, however you allocate that 12% or 14% of the budget being spent on pensions into a universal pension for everybody, that's our pillar one. Pillar two, the EPF, is a quasi pillar two. it needs some changes, and some of them have been suggested by various speakers, so I won't suggest them again. And even as a fund, what happens at 55? Maybe that can be pushed to 60. Maybe you don't let the drawdown happen in one go, as Australia is considering. There are lots of examples how we can turn EPF into a Pillar 2. And Pillar 3 is where we come in. Pillar 3 is the voluntary, incentivized long-term savings, the annuities my colleague on the left mentioned here. That's a bit where we are the cog in the complete machine. The way I look at pension systems is a bit like a city's transport system. You can have a chaotic city, or you can have a well-planned city where there's a bus route in front of your house. The bus goes in a route that takes you to the central terminus where you can get a metro. The metro takes you to the mainline train station. That takes you to the airport. It's very hard to do. It's very easy for me to say, but it's very hard for city planners to put something like that in place, especially in a city that's maybe 1,000 years old. It's easier in a new city. And it's exactly the same challenges for a pension system, but it can be done. And in Sri Lanka, we're not that far off. We've got bits and pieces of that puzzle.
Okay, I'm also going to raise I'll come back to you in a minute. Okay, why don't we have your questions, sir? Yes. Can we give a mic to this gentleman? Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Gamini Ayappa, retired Director General. Well, listening to some of the comments that were made by the panel, I was wondering for a moment that I shouldn't have been present here because of my age. Because they were considering the fact of long life of a pensioner. And I should tell you, the audience here, that I am in complete disagreement with some of the sentiments, with some of the statements and perspectives that have been expressed here. Because they are far from reality and far from the ground situation in this country. And in this forum, some of the comments made were not well informed, and also they lacked basic facts and inadequately researched. I made bold to say that these are not the ground situation in this country. These are, of course, scientific analysis, but the ground situation in this country is far from this analysis. Now, the one matter that has been raised is that the pensions are not costed. Now, to cost the pension, we need a whole range of data and facts and criteria to embark on that on a scheme like that. And the facts and the criteria are variables, and they are constantly changing. And according to the political climate, according to the life, the variables are constantly changing, and they have to be taken into consideration. And the other main point that was raised was that this government pension scheme is a non-contributory system. That's inadequately researched. That's well not informed. Now, the salaries that were drawn by the public servants several years ago were not at all comparable with the public sector. And the salaries were very low. That was that is a hidden, latent contribution that was made by the public servant toward the pension. And also, there was a levy made toward the WNOP, Widows and Pension Scheme. So these facts have to be taken into consideration when the presentations are made in a forum like this. And if I don't want to tell you well at length on various issues. Now, there are subsidies in this country. Now, if you take for example the paddy purchase system, where there is a very huge subsidy made by the government, and the subsidy is toward not only toward the purchase price, but also for the storage, the administration costs, and also the waste that is also going to cost the country. And the people who pay these subsidies are not the people who benefit from any of these things. Now there is a huge subsidy paid toward the railway transport system. I have to go at length into various things, but I don't want to take your time. So many subsidies. Now the subsidy paid to the railway by the treasury is borne by the public of this country. And a person, a student who is using the kerosene lamp for his studies,
right. Thank you,
has
sir.
to pay for the loss that is sustained by the
Right.
government
Right.
through the subsidy. There are so many things that I can mention
Yeah.
here. Thank you very much for your time, and I will stop.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your reality check. There's only so much in a panel like this that we can analyze or discuss a very complex, multifaceted topic like what we have set for ourselves. Would any of the panelists like to respond to the gentleman's observation?
I can only respond to one issue that which I caught because I couldn't hear properly. He said that some of the benefit of work, how you account for it. Because the problem is that it is a benefit that is left to a future generation. So Nishan kept on saying that the problem with entitlements is that the payment for these entitlements is by a future generation. Some of them may not be even born. So this is where you have this intergenerational conflict. So his argument in the sense that this is the justification is fine, but the problem is that that's a promise made that is not paid by the current generation. That is a fundamental problem.
I would like to add to that. I think in terms of salaries of public servants, depending on the category of workers, it is either more than what the private sector gets or less. So at the lower levels, I think it is what this gentleman said is not correct. Because at the lower levels, public sector workers get a higher salary than the private sector workers. But maybe at the higher levels, I have... No,
Let's debate the specific
but
afterwards.
it is, at the higher levels, it is...
If and when given a set of choices.
Can I come in on that and also on what's been said by the pensioners in the audience? I think when we have talked about the cost, the technical difficulty of managing pensions, the issues created by retirement age and aging, some people might feel that this is somehow speaking against the benefits, or that this is a commentary that is criticizing or putting down the entitlements of pensioners. I don't think that's right, and I'm sorry if we sounded like that. Okay? We all know that especially the government servants who are in retirement today have done a yeoman's service to the country, have worked hard, have worked lifelong, and that they have contributed a great deal, and they have been given a promise of the pension that must be kept. Right? So there's no doubt that the promises made must be honored. The concern we are raising is that as you go into the future, you must be careful to measure the promises you make so that you can continue to honor them without getting the country into a financial crisis. Promises were made to farmers too, and they were not honored. We cannot and should not be in a situation where we do the same thing and to avoid that, we must plan better, measure better, cost better today. To answer your question, Nalaka,
It's actually come from Twitter.
I think it it is not a smart idea to give too many choices to a person about their retirement, because people are very poor at making plans for the long distant future. We always want to have can have it now. So putting aside for the future is very humanly difficult, and giving too many choices about taking the money out early can end up leaving you poor in the future. So having a few, 1, 2, 3 choices that are well defined, that are easy to choose between, well explained, is in any country, this is not just about the way to go when the government, and that's why a regulator and the government is so important.
What's called, is it online as well? Will someone Google and find it?
Yes. All you have to do is just to Google an ideal retirement system. It will pop up.
Thank you. We should wind up. Any other last comments from any of our panel members?
I just want to
Yeah.
respond to the earlier question. I think it's never easy. Even in more developed countries, people are not very aware of what their choices are. But there is a whole industry there.
And one particular
Director General of Pension Department. This is a subject naturally close to my heart because I am getting to that retiring age, the official retiring age, and also I am a citizen of this country. I rather wish that I was one of the panel members rather than the rapporteur, because I have so many thoughts and questions that I would like to discuss, but nevertheless this is my job, so I'll try to keep it very short and sweet. One of the key themes that I captured here, for the future, with ever-changing world, that's a challenge. But here's the situation though, in our local context. One of our learned audiences made a very good point. What is the ground reality? I am young enough and old enough to talk about this. When I grew up as a young man, I think my father and mother, both are pensioners. Father is a pensioner, mother was a pensioner, which means she's deceased. Government servants. I think most of our parents expected their children to. Our local pension scheme was, that's a ground reality. We need to take that into account. That's a very good point. We need to take our own ways of doing things. However, the fact that whether we can take care of our parents when we work or with our retirement funds is a challenging task today. It's not the same. Many of our parents cannot be taken care of because culturally we expected to take care of our parents, religiously as well as culturally. The question is why we are talking about this. Can we do that with the means that we have now? So that's a changing dimensions of the society. But it has to be taken into account. You know, what is our real retirement requirement? Because every model that we have discussed here is for a society where everybody works and they make money, and at some point they cannot make that kind of money. So all the financial modeling and everything is all about that. So, but we have a different social element. But I think we are slowly but faster shifting away from that. So we need to think about these models. Here are some things that you need to take back. After 100 years, we are living more than twice that we used to live. I think in 1920s our age was something. Now I saw the statistics to say that double, more than even double. So we are living longer. The word passivity was used. That means when you talk about a pension plan, another daunting challenge is that we are going to live longer after retirement. We need to take things to our own hand, a subject matter that is being discussed. In fact, this is what our Director General is doing with the pension loan scheme. Because think about this. In the places like United States, they have been doing what we have been discussing, changing the retirement age every year by 6 months. It's constantly changing. It was 62 for a long period of time, and they started shifting to 62.5, 66. Now they have pegged it to your birth year. By birth year, you are defined when are you going to retire. They have a lot of statistics, lot of information, lot of computing power, lot of scientists, lot of mathematicians, and they have not figured out, and someone was putting very truly, it has become the most volatile political subject in the United States. Scientists, Nobel Prize winning mathematicians, this is not a subject matter that you can put to bed very easily, ladies and gentlemen. However, given the fact that we are going to live longer, and most of us are having employment in the government sector, but about 47.5% of our people are still working in the rural agricultural sector. only about 13% of people are still covered with any form of pension plans. These are very big, challenging social issues, because increasingly in Sri Lanka, if you open our eyes, all of us are increasingly depending on the amount of money in our savings accounts and current accounts. I think most of you will agree to this, and the younger you are, this is how it's going to play out. We don't have hundreds of acres of paddy fields or rubber fields or any of those things anymore. And the cost of living is very high, and it will continue to be high. Something that was not mentioned, we talk about year 2092. So in summary, without getting into too much of details, I think the message here is that Sri Lankan society has to think about, Professor, you are absolutely right. I think the crux of the matter is what you said, in my opinion. We don't think about retirement. Do we? Actually, do we talk about retirement really? I have been living here for 50 years. I don't think we really talk about retirement the way they talk about that in the United States. You have siblings to take care of you. I come from a family. Forced to conclude discussion. Thank you very much.
මිලකට තිරන ලබන්නේ ෂා රවුෆ් Murthaza Jafferjee Arjuna Manamperi චූලානන්ද සමරනායක ඊළඟට වැඩසටහන මෙහෙයීම සම්බන්ධයෙන් නාලක ගුණවර්ධන ඔබටයි විශ්වාමිත්‍ර වාරම්භ සමරු තිලේ ජාතික විශ්‍රාමික දින සැමරුම මෙලෙස සමාප්තිය සටහන් කරමින් ජාතික විශ්‍රාමික ප්‍රතිපත්තියක් සැකසීම වෙනුවෙන් ශ්‍රී ලාංකේය විශ්‍රාමික ප්‍රජාවගේ හෙට දවස සමෘද්ධිමත් කරන්නට අපකපවන විශ්‍රාම වැඩ දෙපාර්තමේන්තුව තවදුරටත් ඔබගේ සහයෝගයෙන් දයාපරත්වයෙන් ඉදිරියටත් මෙවැනි වැඩසටහන් සංවිධානය කරන්නට අවශ්‍ය ශක්තිය ධෛර්යය ලැබේවා කියන ප්‍රාර්ථනාවෙන් ජාතික විශ්‍රාමික දින සැමරුම මෙලෙස සමාප්ත කරනවා විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් ගීතය ගායනා කිරීම අනතුරුව ඔබට හිමි සන්ධ්‍යා තේපානය ලෑස්ති ඒකත් භුක්ති විඳලා නැවතත් අපත් සමග මෙලෙසින්ම සම්බන්ධ වෙමු. ස්තුතියි.